Society! Welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're talking about the best books of 2021. Now, I had a fantastic reading year in 2021. I found so many new favorites. It's just, I don't know, there's something in the water this year. Even though I had my biggest internet burnout of my life this year, my reading was incredible. And I think a lot of it was because I'm starting to learn exactly what I like, the tropes I like, things I enjoy, and the books that I'm picking up match that better. So I really struggled to get this list to 20 books. And then within the 20 books, I could not bring myself to rank them definitively. So I've just decided to go from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And at this point, I've read, I think, 92 books as of this filming. And so this is like the creme de la creme, the best of the crop from the entire year. We also have a guest today, so I will be filming this with Pretzel. If you watched one of the first videos I put out when I came back in November, he joined me for one of those. But if you haven't seen it, this is Pretzel. He's a ball python. And he is the newest member of our family. He is one of the best things that's happened to us this year, so I decided in a best of video I needed to include him in it. He's kind of slowly getting into adventure mode, so we'll see how long he'll stay with us. He can be kind of hard to keep in one hand if he decides he wants to go see a bunch of things. But if you don't know, ball pythons are very popular pets, especially within the reptile world. They're very docile, they're very curious, and they're just wonderful to have. He's a little bit bigger than the last time I filmed with him too, so he's growing. He's a growing boy. So the first book that came to mind this year, which I think I actually read in January, maybe February, was The Fires of Vengeance, the second book in the Burning series by Evan Winter. This is the sequel to Rage of Dragons, which got a lot of hype. This second book was better than the first book, and I loved the first book. So essentially, the first book follows our main character, Tao, and it's very hyper-focused on him and his revenge plot line. So everything in the first book is based on that and, you know, kind of establishing that as his main goal. So if you didn't like Tao in the first book, you may not have enjoyed it so much. And he is annoying at times. He's dumb. He's just straight up, he makes so many bad decisions. But this second book was amazing because the side characters, the way that they related to Tao and how his decisions, you know, were necessary for the plot, but the people around him kind of tempered that or made the plot more interesting and not so one-track focused. It was just so well done. So if the perspective of Tao was something that bothered you in the first book, I think this second book takes everything that was really good in the first one and just makes it 10 times better. The next book, chronologically, that I read that fits into this list is Dawnshard by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the novella between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, his third and fourth installment in the huge Stormlight Archive series. Dawnshard is the novella between the two. And this novella was written for me. I swear to God. The characters that we follow are my favorite side characters that I was the most invested in. I love like pirate stories, being on ships, like sea adventures, and that's what this book is about. And there's also like Chiri. Oh my God, Chiri. I love animal companions, but like this Chiri is probably one of my favorite animal companions I've ever read. I'm obsessed. I can't go much into the plot of this whatsoever because it involves what characters survive things, you know, how characters meet each other. It would just be spoilers all the way for the previous books. So I'm not going to tell you anything more about it, but just know that this was just a delightful little story in between two large installments that really did have some important points to the plot of the fourth book. So if you're debating whether this is worth your time to read the novella, I would highly recommend that you do so. I know some people skipped Edge Dancer, but I do think that that one also has some points, but especially Dawnshard, the developments that happen at the end of this book are really important for understanding things later in the series, I think. So I would highly recommend picking this one up and not skipping it. The third book that made the list this year is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Now, I know this book has been read by a lot of people, and there are a lot of anti-racist books that are worthy of praise, but this particular one really stuck out to me because of the kind of real-world application that Kendi includes. So, you know, it's not, being anti-racist is not a constant state of being. The fact that it's a state of flux, that you can, you know, actively work towards that goal or passively not do so. I thought that that was a really good way to look at things, to encourage people to be more active. This one was quite impactful for me in the sense that I would like to have it on my shelves to refer to later if I'm kind of at a loss as to how to move forward with, you know, activism in the future. That would be a really good thing to reference. And I don't think that Kendi has the monopoly on the way to look at things either. I think it's important to read different thinkers, but I do think that he has a very interesting perspective that would be useful to keep in mind going forward. Pretzel's just got places to go, people to see. When snakes flick their tongue out like that, that's them sensing the world around them, getting a sense of smell. And when ball pythons are comfortable, when they flick their tongue out like that, it means they're comfortable, they're kind of in adventure mode, they're just checking things out. So he likes to be balled up though, so he's loving this position right now. So it's not a surprise that most of this list is fantasy, but the last one was a nonfiction, and this next one is a hard-hitting contemporary, and that is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. So I don't think we're going chronologically anymore now. I'm pretty sure I read this way later in the year, so I think I messed up my list, but whatever, it's all the same. So this book broke me. I cried on a public bus listening to the audiobook of this. It was my first Tiffany D. Jackson book, and now I'm like obsessed. So I haven't read her newest one, White Smoke, but I did also read Monday's Not Coming, and I adored it. But Grown particularly just hit, I don't know, it hit something in my chest that just, oh man. Grown follows our main character, Enchanted, who is a young Black woman who has dreams of being a singer and, of course, becoming famous in that realm. One day she goes to an audition, and a famous singer, Corey Fields, I think it's his last name, discovers her and offers to kind of show her the way in this industry. And this book very closely follows the R. Kelly situation that has come to light, along with other social commentaries. You all right there? Let's get you a better position. It's so poignant. You really feel for Enchanted, and you're with her. You care about her so much. It's an amazing book. Even if you're not a contemporary reader, which I typically am not, although hard-hitting contemporary is something that I've found over the last year or so that I do enjoy. If you're not a contemporary reader, I still think that this one is worth your time because the writing is just gorgeous. If it's not clear already, all these books are 5 stars. Like, if they're on the best books list of the year, of course they're 5 stars, so that's why I'm not mentioning their rating. The next book is, I think, the only YA fantasy to make this list, and that is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. This book blew me away. I loved it so much. The characters, the magic system, the political setup of this book, the lore, the setting, everything was just incredible. And it was something that I had come to kind of expect to be let down by when it came to YA books. But this one just like brought my, what's the word I'm looking for? Brought my faith back in YA fantasy. If you haven't heard, this book follows Tarisai, who is a very sheltered girl who hasn't really known love because her mother keeps her protected in this like palace and never lets her out to see the world, and also isn't much of a mother to her. And so Tarisai kind of has a very lonely childhood. Also, this is why his name is Pretzel. Because he pretzels himself. How cute is that? He's giving himself a little hug. Anyway, so her mother ends up sending her out on a mission to, I don't want to give anything away, but she sends her to the palace to compete to be one of the people closest to the prince or the king there. And she has a secret mission that she has to carry out. And throughout this book, Tari starts to realize what's important to her, who she really is, and this starts to war with the demands that her mother has given her, or the task her mother has given her. And it's so, so beautifully done. It's not super long either, but what it is accomplished in these pages is amazing. Unfortunately, its sequel, Redemptor, did not accomplish what this book did. But it doesn't take away from what this book was able to do. So if you're debating whether this is worth your time, especially if you're an adult fantasy reader and you're like, YA fantasy isn't cutting it for me, this book I highly recommend as one that you make an exception for. It's so good. The next book is actually right behind me on camera here, and that is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. This was in my best books from the first half of the year. I voted it as my best book, actually, so, you know, this shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone that this is on this list. But in terms of just masterful writing and plot threads coming together, this book is incredible. I mean, the payoff from the previous 3 books and the novellas in between in this book is just stellar. Like, the entire reading experience of this was, and I think I said this in my review and I stand by it now, it was that meme of Leonardo DiCaprio like holding a beer and like pointing at a screen and being like, oh, that meme is this book, because the connections that start to come together, I was just doing that the whole time. These tabs here, I have a tab on almost every page. This is probably my most tabbed book that I own. And every time I come back to the Stormlight Archive, I enjoy literally every second of being in it. It feels like coming home at this point because you've spent so much page time in this world, in Roshar, and with these characters. So again, as this is the 4th book in a series, I can't see anything specific as to why this was, you know, my favorite, or talk about, you know, specific plot points. But if you haven't started reading the Stormlight Archive, the first book is The Way of Kings, and it takes place in this world called Roshar, where there are giant storms that just blow through and destroy anything in its path. And so the world has kind of adjusted to that. And in the first book, we follow Kaladin, who's a slave, but wasn't always one, and has a very interesting story as to how he got there. And we kind of follow his journey away from that position in the first book. But there's so much more to this series. But that's just kind of the general premise for one part of the first book. The Stormlight Archive is one of my favorite series of all time, and I'm definitely not alone in that, you know, opinion. So if you haven't picked it up, highly recommend you do. The 4th installment is well worth the page time. Right, so if my angle changed, that's because my battery died again. It's been dying so much, I think I need a new battery. It can't seem to keep charged anymore. So if the angle's different, that's why. If it dies again before I finish this video, you may be seeing me finish it tomorrow, okay? But let's try to pick up where I left off, which was, I believe, at number 7. Yes, number 7. So the 7th one, Pretzel, what are you doing? Pretzel, come on. Come on, love. Can you come where I can see you? That'd be nice. Thank you, baby. So number 7 is Children of Time. Now, I did want to read more sci-fi this year, and I didn't read as much as I wanted to originally, but what I did read, I loved. So this was my first, no, I read some Becky Chambers before this, but this was like my first like hard sci-fi, and I adored this. This is set in the far, far future where humans can't live on Earth anymore. And so we are looking to terraform and live on other planets. So the first scene of this book is terraforming another world, and the goal is to send monkeys down with a mutation in their DNA to advance their evolutionary speed, so they become, you know, on the same intelligence level of humans at a higher rate or faster rate, and then even surpass humans is the goal. But what happens is the monkeys don't exactly make it down to this planet, and instead this mutation goes into spiders. So we have an entire society of sentient giant spiders, and it's so good. And that storyline, the perspective of the spiders, is told at the same time as a crew of humans who wakes up from cryo sleep on a ship and is trying to find somewhere to land. So those two storylines work together in this book, and it is so good. I loved it. I still haven't read the second book, Children of Ruin, which I think focuses not on spiders but on octopuses, which I love octopuses. So I don't know why I haven't read that yet, but yes, this is amazing. It's worth the hype. I still think about the themes and the things talked about in this book to this day. So if that premise sounds interesting to you, highly recommend this. The next book on this list is very, very different from Children of Time, but that is My Dark Vanessa. This is a very, very heavy book about a young girl who is groomed by her teacher. This book takes place in two different timelines. When the grooming is happening, when the main character is young, and in present time where this teacher is being accused of sexual misconduct and abuse by other women. And our main character is reflecting on this, what was supposedly a great love story in her life, and realizing that maybe it wasn't what she thought it was. And this book is heavy. It is heartbreaking. It is wrenching to read, but I think it's really important because it shows, because it has these dual perspectives, it shows how easy it is to misconstrue grooming, especially when you're young. He's got my necklace here. How easy it can be to see that as romantic. And it's gross and slimy because you're reading it knowing what happens, but in the time you can understand why she felt the way she did. And it's not something you should pick up if you're not in the headspace for it, because there is on page sexual acts between the two of them. So if you don't feel ready for that, and the author does not romanticize it. So it's really hard to read. So if you're not in the right mindset for it, I wouldn't recommend picking this up. But if you are, it is incredible for what it is. And I think it's an amazing book. The next one I've talked about on my channel loads, and that is The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. I still don't hear enough people talk about this for my liking, but this is a very unique fantasy story that focuses more on societies trying to reconcile differences rather than cause them. What are you doing? You're making it hard for me to hold you with one hand, buddy. Where are you going? I have a full individual review for this on my channel. I will link it up above and down below, along with everything else that I mentioned in this video. But that has more detail if you want to learn more about it to see if it's something you'd want to pick up. But I just found this to be a really, really refreshing book. And also it has dragons. So not like dragons that like kind of sort of are there, like dragons on page, and different types of dragons. It kind of gives me How to Train Your Dragon vibes. So I love that aspect of it. But essentially the main plot of this book is that our main character Damon is living on this town that's kind of in the middle of nowhere that is repeatedly raided by this other nation from across the sea, basically based on Vikings. They repeatedly raid his town, and they bring nothing but death and destruction whenever they do. And so in the beginning of this book, those raider ships are seen on the horizon, and the town is preparing to be attacked. However, this time they learn that this group of raiders has not come to raid this time, but to settle, because they're running from something in their hometown. This is just a really refreshing story, and I really loved the characters and how they relate to each other. Pretzel likes it too. It's Pretzel approved. The end of this book was a little bit too tied off with a bow for my liking, but I haven't read the second book yet, so I don't know how that continues. But it's something that I definitely plan to continue on with, and I would love to see more people read it and give their thoughts on it, because I just think it's an amazing series. The 10th book on this list is our first middle grade, and that is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. So I read this via audiobook, but I definitely want to have a physical copy for my shelves. And I'm actually specifically looking for the copy that has like the gilded edges. So if anyone knows where I can get one of those, let me know. I haven't been able to find the ISBN number for it specifically. But yeah, so I definitely want this on my shelves. It was an amazing middle grade. The whimsy is off the charts. Our main character is just so lovable, and the world has so much to discover. So in this book, we follow our main character, Amari, whose brother has gone missing. But he's not the type to go missing. He's very studious. He always, does things, lets people know where he's going. His family is very important to him. So she doesn't believe that he has fallen or that he's died or that he's fallen into, a life of drugs, as some people around her family assume. She knows that something else is going on. And one day she gets a delivery of a notice that she needs to look in the closet at this suitcase that her brother left her. And he leaves her a message. And she learns that he has been working undercover as an agent in this magical society that kind of controls and works with the magical world that has existed, alongside their normal world. They just can't see it. And so after having this revelation, she's able to see the world, and she decides to go and investigate the society, become part of it in order to find her brother. And it's so good. It's got all the whimsy. It's got all those, nostalgic feelings of discovering a magical world for the first time, that's in a lot of middle grade books. And it's just, I don't know, the writing is wonderful, and it makes it stand out among, other books that I've read of this age range or this genre. And I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of the series. I already have the second book on pre-order. 5 stars, loved it. Again, we're going to make another big shift in genre and focus for the next book, and that is From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry. I haven't seen enough people talk about this book, actually, and this is a nonfiction book about the murder of Vincent Chin, who was a Chinese man living in America at the time of the Japanese car boom. And so American workers were blaming all Asian people, regardless of where they were from, for their loss in jobs. And there was a lot of racism at the time. Yes? Kisses. Thank you, love. And so a lot of American workers were blaming all Asian people, regardless of where they were from, even if they were, Asian American, for their loss of jobs. And there was a lot of racism and violence towards Asian Americans at the time. And Vincent Chin was murdered in this kind of cesspool of rage and racism. His life was lost. And it was for no other reason but racism, because he wasn't even Japanese, right? He was Chinese. And his death served as a catalyst for a lot of Asian Americans in activism. And I had never even heard his name before. But reading this book, his life and what was accomplished in pursuit of justice for him was such a huge deal. And I've never heard it talked about. I've never heard his name before. And the end of this book will leave you livid, because I'm not going to give anything away, but things don't go as they should go. Let's just put it that way. But I think it's such an important story to hear and to share and to know of. So I highly recommend you pick this book up. The audiobook was pretty good. A little dry. The reading is a bit dry, but I think that the information is just too important to not be aware of. So highly recommend this one if you haven't heard of it. For number 12, we are back to middle grade, and that is Wundersmith by Jessica Townsend. So I did read Nevermore, I think, last year, at the end of last year. Oh my god, my camera's dying again. Let's see if we can finish this one. So I did read Nevermore at the end of last year, and I did really enjoy it. I think I gave it 4.5 stars. But this second book, Wundersmith, is the epitome of a fantastic middle grade. I enjoyed every page of this, every second of this. The world expansion, the whimsy, like I said, for Amari, is off the charts. It's so good. If you don't know, Nevermore follows Morgan Crow, who is supposed to die on her 11th birthday. However, instead of dying, she gets whisked away by this man called Jupiter North to the land of Nevermore. I'm so invested in this world, these characters, this plot. If you need something to cheer you up, to make your day better, just to bring a little bit of that touch of magic to it, this is the series in general, but in particular, this book, Wundersmith, this is what you need in your life. I refuse to charge and film again tonight because I am tired and it is in the morning at this point, not even nighttime anymore. So Pretzel and I are gonna go to bed and I will see you guys in the morning to finish this video. Hi, hello, it is the next day. Why do I sound like Emma Books right now? This is the next day, so the angle might be a little different, the lighting might be a little different, but I have charged my camera to its fullest extent, and I'm ready to finish talking about the books that I loved this year in 2021. The next book is probably one of the most surprising on this list. I do love fairy tales and I do love folklore, but I didn't expect to love this one as much as I did. And that is Howl's Moving Castle. Now, this is the absolutely stunning Folio Society edition with a slipcase here. But I'll go ahead and take the book out of the slipcase while we're talking about it. So Howl's Moving Castle is kind of a classic children's tale that Studio Ghibli in Japan had made a movie rendition of. And I had seen the Ghibli version of this before, and I did really enjoy it, although it wasn't a favorite Ghibli movie of mine. It was definitely in the top, like, 5. But after reading this book and the source material, guys, I'm obsessed. I love it so much, and it made me love the movie that much more. With the middle grades, we were talking about whimsy, the idea of escaping to another world, the magical aspect of it. All of that is 100% present here, included with a moving castle that can access different, like, dimensions, different areas of the world. It's so good, guys. It's so good. I realize, though, that I haven't said anything to this point to tell you what this is actually about. So basically we follow Sophie, who is resigned to taking over her family's hat shop. She has sisters, but she feels like the burden really falls on her, and she has no choice. Then she has this run-in with the Witch of the Waste, who turns her into an old woman, who we see on the cover. This is Sophie as an old woman. And she's kind of left to contemplate what her choices are. Should she try to change back? What should we do here? At this point enters the significance of Howl, who is a sorcerer in this world, and he lives in a castle that moves of its own accord, thus Howl's Moving Castle. And she decides that this is the place that she needs to go in order to reverse what has happened to her. So we follow her through this journey, through her meeting Howl, and my favorite character in this whole book, Calcifer. If you want whimsy, if you want things that happen because they happen and they don't really need an explanation, this book is for you. Don't get me wrong, there is a larger plot, there are themes throughout this book that come to fruition, but the world that it's encompassed in and just the way that this story is told is incredible. And I'm obsessed with it. And honestly, I haven't done a reread since I got this edition, and I need to. I mean, look at the back as well. Got a shiny spider web going there. And then I just have to show it off a little bit, but we've got these headings here. So stunning. So I will be doing a reread of this definitely next year with this gorgeous edition. Next on my list is my only self-published book, but I definitely plan to change this next year with the amount of self-published I want to consume. But that is Along the Razor's Edge by Rob J. Hayes. So if you've been on my channel for the past couple months, you've seen me talk about this. I read this in the summer for the Indie Accords readathon. And unfortunately, I was hit by burnout before I could film a full video with my thoughts, like a wrap up for that readathon. But I did finally film that with my full thoughts and details this month. So I will link that up above and down below. But this book was my favorite from that readathon. And this, along with a couple other self-published books I read that month, inspired me to have more of a focus on self-pub and also indie books next year. This book follows Escara, or Eska as we come to know her, and she is a sorcerer in this world who is brought up by one particular nation to become a weapon for them, to become a soldier in their war versus another nation. We enter this book where the nation she fights for has lost the war and is completely conquered by the other nation. So she's captured as a strong sorceress and put in the worst prison that exists, called the Pit, which is miles and miles and miles below the surface of the earth where you never see the sun. And we follow her as she's in this prison, kind of carving out a world for herself there, or a life for herself. This series right now only has 3 books, but next year, as was just confirmed on Twitter by Rob J. Hayes, there will be a 4th book releasing next year, and hopefully a 5th book near the end of next year. And I am so excited. I cannot wait. Both of those books will be in my hands, on my bookshelf, being reviewed on my channel as soon as I can get my hands on them, because I love this so much. Lots of books will pitch you morally gray sapphic characters, but I can tell you that this, maybe not just this book, but this series delivers on that claim. Eska is morally gray from page 1, and she just gets darker from there, but you still somehow want to support her. And she learns things about herself through growing up, through the process of growing up. But it doesn't necessarily mean that she makes good decisions. So if you want a main character that pushes your own thoughts of morality by supporting them, this series is what you're looking for. It is so, so, so good. We've got 5 more to go on this list, and this next selection, I have kind of cheated and put like a world, not necessarily a book, but all the books in this world in this list. And that is The Dead Djinn World by P. Djeli Clark. Now, the reason I put the whole world in here is because besides this large installment, which is the first large installment, A Master of Djinn, the rest of them are novellas. There are 3 novellas in the Dead Djinn World, but the other 2 books, as of right now, don't have a physical, copy that I can have in my hands. But the first one I have here is The Haunting of Tramcar 015, and then A Master of Djinn, like I mentioned, the large installment. The world that these books have created is incredible. It's this steampunk Cairo world. There was a man named Al-Jahiz who was able to breach the wall between worlds and allow monsters and djinn and other creatures into our world in these books. So we follow our main character Fatma, who is a detective in this world dealing with the supernatural. And we have a couple different main characters in the novellas, but they all come together in A Master of Djinn. So if you're looking to enter this world, which I highly recommend that you do, I would say read the novellas first. A Dead Djinn in Cairo, The Angel of Khan el-Khalisi, I believe is the name of the super short novella that's out, and then The Haunting of Tramcar 015. If you read these books and you love the world and the style of writing, then I would say dive into A Master of Djinn, because all of the characters do come to fruition here. And I cannot wait to read more in this world. It's like I can see this world with my waking eyes when I read about it, and that is a rare talent for an author to have. So if you haven't picked up any of the books in this world, in this series yet, I highly recommend you do so. They're incredible. This next book that I want to talk about, I don't technically have here with me, but I do have in my collection in America, as I bought the special editions from the Broken Binding, and the shipping was just easier to do to my American house. But that would be The Wall of Storms, which is part of book 2 in the Dandelion Dynasty. I read The Grace of Kings in November, and that book blew me away. The way that Ken Liu goes into the politics, the character work, the engineering, the linguistics of this world is phenomenal. These books are big, but the page time is really well spent, in my personal opinion. Now, if you're someone who doesn't like to spend a lot of time on extraneous world building, or, in-depth dives into the engineering of how a certain weapon might work, I can understand why these books might not be for you. But if you're someone who likes to go into the nitty-gritty, like me, this series is incredible. Basically, in the first book, The Grace of Kings, we enter into this world where there's a domineering emperor. And there are those who would see the emperor's reign continue, and there are those who would see him fall. And all of the main characters we're introduced to here, whether they be high status or low status in this society, play a role in how that turns out. And then in the second book, The Wall of Storms, that is amped up even further. And I don't want to give anything away because it's the second book in a series, but everything I loved about the first book was perfected and improved upon in the second book. Also, the women in this series. Like, I know how we always complain about how male fantasy authors or sci-fi authors don't know how to write women. Ken Liu can fucking write women. Every single female character in this story has different motivations, different personalities, different sources of power, different ways of using that power, and different end goals. And they are just as interesting, if not more so, I may say, than the male characters in this story. So if you want well-written, complicated, detailed female characters, look no farther than the Dandelion Dynasty. I haven't read The Veiled Throne yet, which is the third book, because I have a very strict TBR for December where I'm trying to decrease my physical TBR that I have. So I'm putting it off, but best believe this will be one of the first books I pick up and set my eyes on in January of next year. The numbering of this list has gotten really out of hand considering I had to stretch over 2 days, so I'm not really sure what number this is, but there should be 20 overall. So the next one is Jade Legacy by Fonda. Now this should be a surprise to absolutely no one who has been anywhere near my channel in the past 2 to 3 years, because I fell in love with the Greenbone Saga when I first read Jade City about 2 to 3 years ago. In this series, we follow basically a crime family through their story living in the city of Kekon in Janloon. Now, in the first book, we're very focused on that specific location, but over the next couple books, we expand the politics and the world building to many countries outside of Janloon. And that intricate plot work and political work that was done in this second and now this third book comes to fruition so beautifully in the end of this book. Not only are the politics flawless, but the character work that is so beautifully done in Jade City when we have a smaller world to work with, that character work never decreases. It's always well done. You always feel connected to these characters and care so much about what their future entails that when this book comes around, I mean, every book is full of heart-wrenching moments and worry and stress. And there's a series of events from Jade War that I will never recover from and never forgive a particular character for. And yet, in Jade Legacy, the sympathy, the sadness, the joy that I feel for that character, I would have never imagined I could feel that because of the way I felt about them in Jade War. And yet Fonda pulled those emotions out of me. So you have this incredible individualized character work combined with immaculate politics and world building. And then the ending of this book is perfection. The way that the plot threads are joined together and come to their conclusion, there are things that I predicted, but they didn't happen the way that I predicted them to happen. And I mean, if I'm just gonna call it out, Game of Thrones season 6 through 8, I'm looking directly at you. You do not have to destroy the expectations or subvert the expectations of your audience. That's not the only way to have a satisfying conclusion. And while that was done here in bits and pieces, the real thing that I think Fonda stuck the landing with here is that all of these questions we wanted answered, all of these characters we've grown to love and care for and despise, meet an ending that makes sense. Even if it's not what you wanted, even if it breaks your heart, which there are several aspects of this ending that might do that, it is what makes sense and it is what is right. especially for the characters and the world that she built. So while I said I cannot rank these books, and I genuinely don't think I can, I've loved every single one that I've talked about, this Jade Legacy has got to be top 2. And actually, I think the next one that would vie for the top book of the year is going to come in a second. So, yeah, Jade Legacy's top 2, if not the top book of the year for me. We've got 3 more books to talk about. I'm going to save the other book that could vie for Jade Legacy as my best book of the year for the end. So first, let's talk about the other 2. And this next one is I, Robot. Now, I don't have this physically yet, but I definitely plan to. And this is a classic sci-fi book by Isaac Asimov. As I mentioned with Children of Time, I became genuinely interested in the sci-fi genre this year. I love the themes that it works with, I love the ideas that it throws about, and I, Robot deals with all of those in such a beautiful way. So essentially, this book is a collection of stories as told by an old woman who has been present for basically the entire life of robotics, from the beginning of its birth when AI was something new and the robots couldn't yet talk, to the current day where there are supercomputers that basically can control humans. In the book, there's this interviewer talking to this woman about all of her experiences with robots and how she's interacted with them throughout the years. And through this, we get to see these different questions of robotics explored. So what would happen if a human got too attached to a robot, or vice versa? What would happen if a robot had too much empathy and didn't know how to best support the humans around them? What would happen when a robot has like 2 core principles that clash in a certain moment? How would they respond to this clash of morality? And all of these stories are told through a fantastically human lens. So even though we're exploring this otherworldly intelligence, it's told through a human lens through which we can connect to it. And it's so engaging and interesting, and I could not put this book down. So I am looking for a version of this that I would like to have on my shelves, but this has inspired me to read other of Isaac Asimov's work slowly throughout the years. I know he has the Foundation trilogy, I believe, and other works under his belt. So I will definitely be reading, all of those books slowly throughout the years, but I was just so enamored by this book. Like, I was listening to it on audiobook, and I would take the long way around to go to work because I wanted to listen to more of it. So this is definitely an unexpected favorite for me from this year. The second to last book we're going to talk about is also an unexpected favorite, and that is The Lovely War. So this was a book that was specifically on my December TBR because I had it on my currently reading list on Goodreads for forever. We all have those books that just kind of hang out there. And this was an audiobook I had started, actually, I believe in 2020. And then it got returned to the library about 30% into the audiobook, and I just never checked it back out again. So with this TBR I have in December of trying to clear out all of my currently reading books, as well as finishing out the series I own physically, this was a high priority on my list to finish. And I checked it back out of the library, and I could not stop listening to this as soon as I started again. I love this trope of meddling gods, which is actually another reason that I adore the Dandelion Dynasty. But in this particular book as well, there are these gods like meddling in human life. And it's a trope that I've been adoring and loving and can't get enough of in the last couple months. And this book explored that to an extreme. And basically, we follow a love story during World War I, I believe. I believe it's World War I. And it's this like epic love story over years and years, kind of contrasted with the gods who meddled in this story. And it is beautiful. I teared up. I did a tear or two fell at one point reading this, and it's beautiful. I am not a historical romance person whatsoever, but maybe it's the meddling god trope, like the fantastical aspect of this, that made it more palatable to me. But the combination of those two things, or whatever it was, I was sucked into the story in a way that I usually am not into this genre. And it got 5 stars from me. So this is a very pleasant surprise to add to my best books from 2021. Now finally, the last book on this list, the one that vies with Jade Legacy for the #1 spot, and one that I know people who have been around my channel have seen, is How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. This book is so good. This is a translated Japanese work, originally written by Genzaburo Yoshino, but translated by Bruno Navasky. And the translation of this is flawless. I can say, as someone who is quite advanced in Japanese themselves, there were points in time where I was reading this and I could tell what Japanese Navasky was translating from, and the nuance of that was present in the translation that he put on the page. So I don't think a lot will be lost in translation when you're reading this, but I don't know how to describe how much I love this book, so I have a full review for this, which I will link up above and down below, which I highly recommend you please go watch if you want to know more details, especially fresh after me reading this. But essentially, we follow our main character, Copper, who is a 15-year-old boy who one day is standing looking over Tokyo with his uncle, and he has this moment when he realizes how many people live in this world. Just the sheer scope of life that exists on this planet. And him having that moment changes the way that he views the world from that moment going forward. And so we explore his life after this revelation through his daily daily things that happen to him at school and whatever, along with letters written to him from the uncle who is with him when he has this revelation. And maybe it's because I was in linguistic and also anthropology major in university, but the way that human connection is discussed in this book, and the way that people discuss how do you have a good life? How do you have a life with meaning? How do you interact with other people in a way that means something? The way that that discussion happens in this book is breathtaking. It's breathtaking in its simplicity, which is so very Japanese of it. But it's through the tiny things that we can extrapolate to the larger things in life. And that idea is so beautifully explored here. So I don't want to give anything more than that away. If you want to know more details, like I said, please watch the specific review that I have for this book. But talking about it, is it better than Jade Legacy? Better is not the right word. Can it beat Jade Legacy for where I am in my life and matching what I need right now? Possibly, but I can't bring myself to actually rank those two as the best. But I'm begging you to read this. Also, just to put the cherry on top of all of this, the last Studio Ghibli film that Hayao Miyazaki is supposed to be involved with is based on this book, which is Hayao Miyazaki's favorite children's book. So, if what I said didn't convince you, let that convince you that you could read the source material for the final Ghibli movie that Hayao Miyazaki is supposed to be part of. You could read that source material before it comes out. So, please, I'm begging you, pick this up. That concludes my best books of 2021. This was a long video. I hope you settled in, you had a snack, you had a drink, whatever you needed for this. But it was a fantastic reading year. It was full of a lot of interesting situations and experiences in my life. But overall, I think that I've really hit my stride in finding what I enjoy and what I love, while also going out of my comfort zone here and there. So look forward to what I plan to do in 2022. That video should be coming out soon, whether it be this year or the very beginning of next year, I'm not quite sure. But I will be releasing my goals for 2022 coming soon. But 2021 is an amazing reading year. I have no complaints. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, if you agree with me, if I've inspired you to pick something up you're on the fence about. I would love to chat in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I'd appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!